ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the last Thrive in China Roundtable for 2022, where we are talking about how to avoid fraud and manage human resources within foreign companies in China. And apologies ahead of time. We are doing this at 8 a.m. Central European time for the main reason that I didn't want to miss my son's Christmas show. So we're doing it a bit earlier. For those that weren't able to join live, I am going to be sending out this as soon as possible so that you have the recording and can watch it at your own time. So what are we covering today? Today, we're going to be talking about factors that contribute to fraud and corporate governance, strategies that will help you to avoid fraud, and ideas on how to help you develop corporate governance within your company. Now, first of all, before I start, corporate governance is an administrative activity that does require you to sit down on your desk, think about how you want to operate within your organization and how you want to put in processes. My husband, who's a finance guy, always says that it's methodologies and processes. We need methodologies within our organizations and processes to secure that our business runs smoothly and obviously grows and scales up at the speed that we want it to. If you don't implement these methodologies and these processes, this ultimately is what leads to fraud, because you are leaving the doors open for people to commit fraud, even those to commit fraud without realizing that they are committing fraud. Okay, so let's begin. Why should you be concerned by fraud in China? Well, quite frankly, because fraud does exist in China, like it exists in any other jurisdiction around the world. It also might surprise you when it comes. There are people who've got high expectations when they go into the Chinese market. And obviously, it's a new business culture that they're learning about on a day-to-day basis. Now, because currently with COVID regulations, and just generally, you might be a person headquartered, based in your headquarters, you're not physically on the ground in China. So you might misplace your trust in employees, suppliers, customers, anybody that is within your ecosystem. Now, many problems within foreign invested companies in China can be traced back to their initial establishment and the project's structure. The main reason for this is that many foreign companies come into China with this new culture, language boundaries, high expectations, and their Western style of doing business, which quite frankly does not work in China. Now, it's very good to come into China with high expectations, and they should have high expectations. There are phenomenal opportunities that exist in China. However, one should be prepared for unexpected occurrences and obstacles. And it's also equally wrong to place blind trust in the system and accept any problem that arises by saying, and this is a very common phrase, well, that's China. Okay, we can avoid this. We're now in 2022, starting in 2023. We're saying this phrase less and less because we are realizing that China isn't the wild, wild west anymore. It is a mature jurisdiction, especially when you look at the tier 1 cities. It's definitely more mature than other Asian cities, as well as Western cities around the world. There is no longer any excuses for protecting your business. So the key thing is supervising, paying attention to your business that is on the ground. And ultimately, by supervising, by paying attention, you can prevent many problems that will arise, and it will help you to alleviate your worries and your concerns. Now, most importantly, what you need to realize is that fraud can and probably will happen to you at some point in your China journey. Now, quite frankly, I have spoken to a lot of business owners that own businesses throughout the world. And I do not know one entrepreneur, one business leader who has not experienced in some shape or form fraud. So I don't want to say that fraud is just a China issue. It's not. It's a global issue. Okay. And if you have that expectation that it will happen to you, perhaps it will incentivize you and give you the mindset that you need to realize that you've got to implement corporate governance. So let's talk about how you can protect yourself and in what areas you should be prioritizing the protection level. So the first thing I want to highlight is you've got to protect yourself in terms of intellectual property, trademark registrations, patent registrations, copyright registrations. You need to look at corporate governance and actually not just talk about it, implement it, execute it. You need to set up due diligence procedures where you are then vetting business partners, employees, anybody that you are planning on collaborating with within your ecosystem in the Chinese market. Vet them, vet your partners, vet the employees. Company chops, business licenses, bank tokens, these are all fundamental tools that are utilized within the running and operating of your company in China. So how are you going to delegate this operation? Who is going to be responsible for chops? Who's responsible for licenses? Who's responsible for bank tokens? Who's going to keep this? Will you have a lock and safe within your office? You know, added to this would be other tools that are of vital importance, like the original FAPIAOs, who's got access to that, who's got access to the e-FAPIAOs, who's got contact with your tax officers or to your bank manager. Really thinking about your full operation and understanding who is going to have that communication standpoint and who's going to be holding the tools to implement those functions that have to occur. That leads me on to developing system processes. So like my husband keeps reiterating to me, it's all about methodology and processes. You have a method, you've created a supply chain, you've created a business model. How are you now going to develop a process to manage that methodology? System processes for trade transactions, for service transactions are fundamental. I always bring up the example when I talk about this about providing your salespeople with thresholds. If they are salespeople, they're communicating with the customers that are in China, they are responsible for the negotiations. They don't want to have to keep getting your approvals back home because you're just wasting time. So how are you fundamentally giving them flexibility and leeway to manage a negotiation without having to go back and forwards with you, where you're based in the HQ? So having a system process saying, okay, if there's an order for 100 pieces, you are allowed to give a 5% discount. If there's an order for 1,000 pieces, you can give a 5% or 20% discount. Having these thresholds will guide your salespeople and it will help you to set boundaries with them, right? And this is also a way for you to detect whether any fraud is happening, whether any kickbacks are happening. But whenever you're developing these system processes, don't underestimate that somebody from the HQ should still maintain relationships with these customers. Why? Because you want them to also talk to you, right? Sometimes customers won't actually talk to you if you don't pick up the phone or you don't jump on a Zoom. They might reveal a lot of insight about your salespeople. So again, fundamental is having these system processes in place. Do you have a system process in regards to inventory and warehousing systems? Most of the time, people outsource this to freight forwarders, but do you do your own internal checks? Right now, with the year end coming up, with our clients that hold inventory themselves in China, we are doing inventory spot checks to verify that whatever is in the software system, ERP system, is matching to the reality, okay? Now, there are many other ways where you will have to potentially protect yourself, okay? It's important to evaluate the assets that you have, the trade flow, cash flow, product flow that you're developing. If you're a service-oriented company, it's the same. Service flow, cash flow, to understand where potential loopholes might be for people to commit fraud. Where do you have to develop system processes? Now, in China, luck is not a strategy. When I arrived in China in 2003, and I started to hear these war stories of what people were going through, I was like, this will never happen to me. Never. Mind you, I never set up one single piece of corporate governance within my structure, okay? But I was on the ground and I was like, I'm there, I'm supervising. and this will just not ever happen. Well, within the first 8 months of operating in China, I terminated an employee according to Hong Kong labor laws versus China labor laws, which got me into trouble. And I ended up forking out over 100,000 RMB in compensation that I actually didn't need to by law, but I got stuck into a very complex, embarrassing situation. And yeah, 100,000 RMB out of my pocket for absolutely no reason had I implemented corporate governance procedures and system processes, which I now have. Every time I'm about to terminate somebody, I consult my lawyer on, let's review all the documents we have on hand, let's review what we're going to say. And in some instances, I even bring my lawyer with me so that I have somebody who is officially a labor lawyer, knows all the policies and regulations, and at any moment in time can come back to the staff if they've got questions. Whereas I would not be able to because I don't know every single clause and article that is in the labor law system. Now, again, in 2003, 2004, when I first arrived, my friends and I, our philosophy was, these stories are ridiculous. I mean, they're fun to listen to. Thank God it's not me. And by the way, it will never happen to me. But obviously, everybody's luck eventually runs out and everybody eventually gets themselves into trouble. Like I said, fraud does exist in China. People abuse and take advantage of the lack of knowledge that you have. And they use that as a leverage piece to get more out of you and your business. So you've got to figure out who within your ecosystem can also act as a protection method, right? Labor issues, I've got my labor lawyer. I already know a lot through my experience. I've learned a lot. I don't want to risk it, right? You just don't want to risk it. So you have a conversation with your lawyers prior to that termination, just to use as a brainstorming arm to make sure you are covering all your tracks. So it is really important. Luck is not a strategy for China at all, okay? Now, my belief is, imagine what your life would be like if you had a China subsidiary and knew that everything happening was in compliance. How much better would you sleep at night? Now, I've not been in China now 3 years due to COVID, almost 3 years due to COVID. And I've had to implement more corporate governance into my organization because I'm not on the ground. Now, the issue is the following. Corporate governance can lead to inefficiencies in terms of operating your business. And by inefficiencies, all I mean is that things will take a little bit longer because you are implementing certain restrictions. So one thing you have to realize is that we need to implement corporate governance within our organizations. And like I mentioned, it does come with a price in the fact that there are inefficiencies. But what are these inefficiencies? The efficiencies in the end of the day just means that things take a little bit longer. Now, I was on a call last week with a client of mine whose China staff was on the call, and she was very upset because she was getting delays in signing sales contracts. And the issue is that the headquarter refuses to leave the company chops with the staff in China. They've outsourced that to Woodburn, where we keep the company chops anytime something needs to be chopped off on or signed off on. We come in, we do a review of the document just to make sure it's legit, and we then place the chop on it. We also expect the HQ to read through these contracts themselves, but it's kind of like a 6-eye principle where you've got the China staff, the HQ, and then a third party reviewing these documents and then putting the chop. So where you only have one set of eyes reviewing, the China staff, and the fact that this person might not even properly review and just put the chop, you've got 6 sets of eyes reviewing something, placing the chop, and obviously it's not going to happen within 5 minutes. It might take a day. HQ might be delayed. It might also come from the third party, the law firm, or your accountant or whomever. They can't read everything right there and then. They might need 24, 48 hours to do this review or even to put the chop. So of course there's delays and there's frustrations by the local staff because they can't speed things up. And for them, they feel it's an embarrassment that they can't return a signed contract to the client within the same day. It's embarrassing for them that it might take an extra 1 to 2 days. Now, in China, you want to eliminate fraud, you want to have security, you want to sleep at night, you want to know that your office is doing well. Expectations need to be very clear and transparent. We know the local staff will complain because there are inefficiencies from their side, and they feel like you don't trust them enough to give them the chops and all of that. HQ's expectations is we want to protect the business. We never know what these people are going to do. And with COVID, we're not traveling in and out of the country to do these reviews. So ultimately, we're going to use a third party to protect ourselves. HQ doesn't care about timeline because anyway, in Europe, it takes forever to sign a contract, never happens overnight. So it's a matter of having that transparency and telling the local staff, look, if it takes an extra day or two longer, tell the customer it will, because you've got compliance procedures that have to be met. Now, if you are a listed company or a multinational company, you will have these corporate governance procedures that are even stricter. I know companies in China that have to use software systems that are not compatible in China. But because of corporate governance laws and policies internally, they have to, no choice. So you have to deal with it. So for me, it's a matter of going up front to your team and saying very openly, honestly, we like you. We know you're doing a good job, but the owner doesn't know you. We've hired you because we're responsible for China. And from the owner's perspective, we need to implement controls to make sure that this company continues and that we don't have any issues legally and that no fraud will ever exist. You have to meet these expectations. For me, I talk bluntly and brashly with the team about this. Okay, I'm not on the ground. So I need to protect my business. And you can like it or you don't like it. And if you want to leave, then leave. I can't stop you from doing that. So it's really a matter of having that talk, being transparent about it, being open about it, but also developing these methodologies and systems. Now, I've listed here, there are a lot of reasons why fraud can occur, but I want to list the 4 that I see as the biggest issues when it comes to fraud, particularly in the last 3 years, okay? The first one is the lack of control and communication. Now, what I mean by this is I am every single Monday morning, Central European time, this is what I have blocked out in my calendar for internal communication and control with my team in China. This is where we come together, we sit down, we talk about clients, we talk about internal issues, and it is where I use that time together with my right-hand person in China to improve on certain efficiencies. What that means is I listen to my team about the problems that are occurring and we develop control mechanisms, either changing them, being flexible with them, pivoting them, deleting them completely because my confidence has been gained, whatever it might be. But every single Monday, I am doing this on a week-to-week basis. This does not include then the client meetings that are generated throughout the week. This is purely internal communication, okay? Now, some clients will do it every single morning. Some clients will do it once a week, but I know companies who do not do it at all. Basically, they tell their Chinese staff, you are responsible for China. Don't call me. Really, ultimately, that's what they are doing. And during COVID, during the lockdowns, this is where it was very clear to see the psychology behind the Chinese staff, where they were totally lost, having zero guidance from their employers, from the headquarters about what to do next. So developing internal control mechanisms, developing internal communication systems, blocking your calendars to make it a priority to openly discuss with the team is of vital importance. A control mechanism I have with my clients is that we have a monthly phone call. I also have a monthly newsletter that is specific for my clients. a monthly newsletter, a monthly call to remind them of deadlines, but also to talk about red flags, suspicions, and to talk whatever's on the agenda about what's coming up. My calls for November as well as December are all about year-end financial management reports, deadlines, audits that are coming up straight after Chinese New Year, developing a whole series of actions that have to happen because we have corporate compliance deadlines that we have to meet with the tax bureaus, the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, etc. So every company has, there's no right or wrong about how you develop this. It's just, again, methodology and processes you have to develop. Number two is turning a blind eye. Now, yesterday I was on a call with a client who last week ran into a difficulty with their local GM. And he said, yeah, I set up this call the following week with me to discuss. And I said to him, I said, why didn't you call me right there and then? You have my WeChat ID. Why didn't you just pick up the phone and call me as the situation was physically occurring so that you could have a brainstorming arm? That's why I'm here. I'm your advisor. I'm here to act as your mentor, to guide you in these tricky situations. This is my added value, is I've gone through these situations and I'm here to act as that brainstorming arm. And basically he said, well, I was able to sort it out, but I have to admit there was about 48 hours where it was a bit tricky and tight and I didn't know what to do. And so he was turning a blind eye on the situation. Luckily, it got sorted out. But in yesterday's discussion, he basically said, what can I do in case a staff member, a salesperson, decides to leave and now wants to sell third-party products, i.e. competitors' products, which I assume is what happened, to customers. And I said, you need evidentiary proof. So if this has been happening, do you have proof? Do you have written proof? Do you have documentation that proves that this has been occurring, or is it just word by mouth? Word of mouth. You need to have documents. You need a file specifically related to this employee, and anything that comes in that can act as a evidentiary proof against him has to go into that file. And I said, I hope that although the situation last week has been sorted out, you've issued a warning letter to say that this can never happen again. Because in the employment contract and in the employee handbook, it says that if you issue 3 or more warning letters, you have right of termination without compensation. So it's all about connecting the dots. Now, turning a blind eye is something where, especially during COVID, companies were doing this incessantly. They were sort of like, China is the second priority. I want HQ to survive. So I'm just, whatever happens on the ground just happens on the ground. This is where fraud was taking place. People were taking advantage of the situation. And this is where a lot of companies started liquidating their businesses because they just couldn't manage them anymore. Pity to exit a market that is full of opportunities because you can't be bothered to supervise and pay attention to the business. Instead, you're like, well, you know, the staff say this is okay, so just do it. What nonsense. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that I made when I moved in 2003, 2004 was the fact that I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have an advisor. I didn't have somebody that I could easily call and say, hey, this and this happened today. Is it my imagination that this shouldn't happen? Because a lot of the time, you don't know in China, the rules and regulations are so different from the Western world. You don't know what's right or wrong. You can have as much knowledge as you like, but sometimes you just want to have that someone to talk to verify who is specifically an expert in that field who can give you that advice just to validate what your gut is telling you. All right. So lack of control and communication, develop a system internally, block calendar space that you're constantly in communication with your team. Turning a blind eye, develop an ecosystem of advisors that you can talk to at a moment's notice, that you can pick up the phone and say, look, this is happening. What do you think? Then comes the point of ethical situations. Now, foreign companies feel in China that it is sometimes appropriate to promote business activities that they themselves would never conduct in their home country. And again, you can say, well, it's a lack of knowledge. They don't know how to operate in China. They just don't know how to do business in China. Their local team is telling them that this is all okay. Or ultimately, they're fully aware of what they're doing and they believe, again, that they'll get lucky and they'll get away with it. Okay, now this is the wrong perception to have in China. We are, again, end of 2022, beginning of 2023, when you are working in the big cities in China, like Shanghai and Beijing, Shenzhen, even tier 2 cities like Hangzhou, it is not the wild, wild west anymore. You cannot get away with stuff, particularly if you are aware of what is going on and you agree that you're doing under table behavior or under table dealings. So it is really important to understand that ethical situations in the West are relatable to ethical situations in China. And if you realize with common sense that something that your staff are doing something that is not quite legitimate, raise your hand, say stop, get advice on it, and protect your business. Because you do not want to get into those situations. Last but not least, it's employees. Okay, it is really easy, because it is the way of the world at the moment, to hire employees that you don't know. You've never even met them face to face. You need people on the ground, but with the circumstances and the border controls and whatnot, you haven't been going. That might change in 2023, thank goodness. But previously, you were hiring people you'd never even shaken a hand or had a drink with, right? You basically were hiring them through Zoom calls. So again, I go back to the point of vetting your ecosystem, vetting your partners, vet your employees. Get back, no, I don't mean background checks, but get an understanding of who they are. Again, develop control and communication systems from day one. Don't trust them from day one. Trust is earned over time. Loyalty is earned over time. It's a two-way street when you're thinking about it with the employees. So please, please, please make sure that you develop control systems in place. And although they will come back, like I said, saying that this is not efficient, this is not convenient, you're creating issues with the customers because you're 1 or 2 days late, things like that. Again, be open with them, saying we want to develop internal controls and internal policies. Now, ultimately, what I want to talk about next, so for me, these are the 4 big things that can lead to fraud, but I want to provide you with 8 solutions that will help you sleep at night and help you to know that your business is in compliance. Now, with these 8 solutions, one thing that you have to realize is that it's not a matter of just creating these guidelines, these solutions, it's a matter of also executing them and supervising them. So you would need to have somebody to go in and make sure this is happening, unless you outsource some of these functions. So the first one I want to talk about is implementing robust internal controls and policies. Like I said, right? Develop methodologies and processes. Make sure you don't just write them up into beautiful documents, but that you actually execute them, make your employees read them, make your employees sign off on them, and they are ultimately internal guidelines, if you will. If you don't want to use the word controls because it sounds so negative, guidelines. They are guidelines for your staff to be able to operate this entity in China. The next one is segregating accounting duties. Now, obviously, you can outsource the accounting duties to a third party, which helps you to segregate those duties to begin with. But if you're planning on keeping your accounting team in-house in China, have different people do different functions in terms of the accounting, meaning have somebody accountable for AP, somebody accountable for AR, somebody accountable for the bank only, somebody accountable for the tax bureau only. By segregating these duties, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket with one person in control. Right now, we're going through a liquidation process on behalf of a client who had an in-house bookkeeper paying this person an absolute fortune with the title of finance manager. They were not at all capable of being finance managers. They only had the skill set to be bookkeepers, which led to so many issues in terms of tax, in terms of payroll, and now causing more issues now with the liquidation. So segregate those duties. And also I want to highlight that you might find as a startup in China, it is more cost effective to outsource all the functions. And as you grow your business and scale it, to bring certain functions in-house, but still keep certain functions outsourced. So you can have a mix and match as well. The third is training your employees to prevent and detect fraud. So again, if you are not transparent with your staff about implementing internal controls and processes and ultimately saying, listen, anytime that we've got a guideline, I get it, it's not efficient because for you, you would like to make a decision at a moment's notice without going through any hierarchy and any discussion points. I get it, totally understand it, but we are an organization where we have to implement guidelines, processes, controls. So there is a hierarchy where you have to get approvals. And we want you to be working in the best interest of this company because we see you as being a long-term employee. We want you to grow with us as we are growing ourselves. We want you to be that value add to our organization so that we can grow. This is your spiel to them, right? Make them feel included, which ultimately also means that if you see employees causing issues, committing fraud, receiving kickbacks, whatever it might be, you need to be a whistleblower and reach out to me or reach out to XYZ. Once a month, this XYZ person needs to communicate with all staff to re-highlight this, that everybody is working in the best interests of the company, not in themselves. You've got to train them. You need to have that discussion every month. And I know when you've got a 50-person team in China, it's impossible. So you've got to delegate that work and create a hierarchy so that people are saying this down the chain. But if you're a small team, doing 3 calls a month with 3 employees, it's not a big deal. So I do have that. I have individual calls with my senior management team, who then rolls down to their own team members because we have a hierarchy scene. They're spread out into teams where I implement that. I want to prevent fraud and I want you to help me detect it. Simple as that. Now, in smaller organizations, as is mine, we don't have an anonymous reporting system. We're too small for that. But in large organizations, of course, you can develop an anonymous reporting system where people can submit complaints through an anonymous email or through an anonymous system to then not feel like they are going to get in trouble or get disliked by others, whatever the case might be. But again, in small organizations, I want to know who is the whistleblower. I want to praise them. And if people don't like that, I'm going to get rid of them. I don't need these bad eggs in my organization. Don't have time for bad eggs. But I do have time for those that are willing to fight and fend for my company. Number 5 is conduct financial health checks and audits smartly. Now, every single company in China, although legally they don't have to perform a year-end audit, they are encouraged to perform a year-end audit because if they don't, they can't pass the annual inspections and they can't pass the annual profits tax filings. So the year-end audits is always a great way for external auditors to come in and to review your books, have a fresh set of eyes on your organization, and to review the status of your company from a financial perspective. However, there are a lot more of other areas where you can do audits or health checks. Doesn't have to just be from a financial side. You can do an HR health check, having a review of all the employment contracts, all the documents there. Is there anything that is not in sync? You can do a overall contract review in terms of sales contracts, lease agreements, marketing agreements, having a lawyer come in to review that everything is there and is renewed. You can do a whole variety of different audits and health checks. Now, the year-end financial audits are a fantastic methodology. I think people shouldn't see that as something that's negative. It's something that's positive. However, I would probably say that you should do an internal review every so often, every 3 to 6 months, again, to help you to sleep at night. but also to keep your staff on their toes to realize that you are investing in external parties to come in and to do reviews on your organization. And again, you can say it in a negative way where you say, I'm bringing external auditors to detect fraud, which will scare everybody. Or you can say, I am bringing external auditors to come in because I want to improve the efficiency of my organization and make sure that we have crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's, because we are now going through the next phase of growth and investment. And I need to make sure that our foundation is secure. Very different way, right? The next is educating yourself and your HQ on your China business. So this is in terms of cultural trainings, which I highly recommend. And I did a roundtable specifically on trainings. A lot of people make the assumption that we've only got to train our China team. It's not just that. You've also got to train your HQ. You've got to train all the individuals that are responsible for the China business or are at a communication standpoint with the China business, so that they can also assist in detecting fraud or issues within the organization. Many of them will probably turn a blind eye because they'll be like, I don't know China. My assumption is that everything is okay. I hate assumptions. And when I do get calls from people where they say, Kristina, I need your help with the trade flow, and our business partners have said that we can do X, Y, Z, and I'll say, oh, well, my assumption is they're saying this because of X, Y, and Z. But I hate to assume. So you need to go back to them, raise these 3 questions to learn and understand and have transparency over what their ultimate goals are and objectives are. Because I don't want to assume. I don't want to assume anything in my business. I want fact. So educating yourself is critical. And if you are going into a team meeting and saying, okay, we're going to do X, Y, Z because I assume that, this is wrong. This is what will get you into trouble. Do not assume anything. Get the facts, ask the questions, be brash, be blunt. Otherwise, you can't do business like that. You can't do business based on assumptions. You can when you're doing budgets and forecasts, but hopefully you've got concrete facts supporting it. And you need that concrete fact to move forward. Number 7 is having another set of eyes guiding you. And this is where having a mentor, having an advisor, outsourcing your accounts, having an external CFO review your books, having an external law firm, in-house counsel coming in to review your contracts. Having another set of eyes will cost you more. That's the downside of this, but it will help you to protect your business. Okay, people who are on the ground to support you, to verify that everything is okay, and to make suggestions on how to improve. Number 8 is hiring experts in your field, and I relate this to employees. New graduates are useless, in my opinion, at this moment, especially when you're a small structure. New graduates are fantastic if you are a large organization and you need subordinates and you need to build up that network of subordinates. But if you are a fresh startup and you need to build up a team, you need managerial experienced people who can bring their expertise, bring in their experience, and provide added value to your organization. I will never forget, a friend of mine had his own company in Shanghai, and he came to me for lunch one day and said, Kristina, I'm going to ask you about VAT question. I'm like, okay, no issue. Let's talk about VAT. So we had a lunch all about VAT and how it is related to his business. And he said, oh my God, in the last 45 minutes, I've learned more than I have in the 2 years of hiring my accountant. And I said, well, that's really weird that you say that, but your accountant has what type of experience? I said, how old is she? How many years of work experience has she had? Does she have a CPA license? What's her background? So he was giving me this insight. He basically hired an accountant that had 2 years worth of experience. Basically, that means she had no experience because she was a subordinate in the previous company. Had no one-to-one interaction with tax officers. This was the first time she'd ever spoken to a tax officer. Had no idea what to do, how to talk to them, how to negotiate with them. Didn't know what questions also to ask, to raise. Didn't know the balance of fighting which wars, which ones are worth fighting for and which ones just stand back and say, okay, I agree with you. So, you know, from a financial perspective, he was stable, But actually, he could have been doing so much better if he had just paid a little bit more for somebody who had solid experience communicating with tax officers, knowing how to deal with banks, knowing how to deal with all of these third parties in the financial world. And he would have gained the knowledge level of that 45 minutes I spent with him 2 years ago. Okay. And with this new knowledge that he had gained that day, basically it led him to changing his business model, changing the way he was negotiating with customers, and helping him to have a better cash flow system. So hire experts in your field that can educate you, not that you are educating them. Okay. Now, what I would love to know is who has implemented these solutions within their organizations. And I hope that these 8 solutions are a checklist for you. For those of you that are planning on incorporating, for those of you that already have entities in China, I hope that this is a checklist for you to implement and execute within your organizations, and also to make your eyes wide open and realize there might still be a lot of work that you have to do. Now, my most favorite phrase is that preemption by action is your best and least expensive form of protection, i.e., you have now 8 solutions. It's up to you to implement and execute. And you can outsource this, mind you, okay? There's no issues in that, but you've actually got to execute this, okay? So if I'm going to give you a short task list of what you really need to think about from those 8, I've narrowed it down to 4. I would probably say this. 1, create internal operational guidelines and management directives. So I have reworded that because I think this is more of a positive mindset than thinking of them as control systems. Operational guidelines, management directives, management rules. Everybody needs to be aware of what their liabilities are and what their boundaries are. Start doing health checks and internal audits in different departments. Nope, nothing is stopping you from doing this. Okay. Appointment of personnel. You want people in the upper end of your hierarchy to be the detectors of fraud. Okay. They are your spies. So are they educated enough to be able to do that? Have you appointed the right people to do that? Reflect on that senior management, whether they're on the ground or whether they're in HQ, and educate them that they become the leaders in implementing all of this. And number 4 is obtain advice and build an ecosystem of China experts. What I mean by that is, don't just hire me, which I'm tooting my own horn here, but there are lawyers out there that can act as your advisors. There are thousands of corporate services firms that can act as your advisors. There are mentors, coaches, people who can act as your advisors, as your brainstorming arms in situations that will arise where you need to talk to someone, to vent, to understand whether you have done something wrong or done something right, okay? So reach out and discuss that and build that ecosystem. So that's the end of today's presentation. As usual, I always love to hear what people's takeaway was. Let me know. Unfortunately, we're too early doing this roundtable today, doing this recording. But if people do watch this on record, then if you've got questions, don't hesitate to reach out. How you can work with Woodburn and myself, we offer a whole variety of services all the way through from brand advisory, trademark search and registration, validating market entry strategies, incorporation advisory, incorporations, and then all of the ongoing outsourcing solutions all the way. And then you can also appoint us as these detectors of fraud, from supervisor, finance manager, non-executive director. We can act as mentors. We can outsource the accounts so that we can also act as a detector from the finance side of things. So if you've got any questions, email me at Kristina@woodburnglobal.com. It's Kristina with a K, Kristina @woodburnglobal.com. And if you're interested in learning more about how to protect your Chinese company, again, something outside of what we've discussed today, there is no question that's a dumb question when it comes to China. Reach out, we can have a conversation. I'd be happy to discuss with you. Now we are officially on break for Christmas and the New Year holidays. Our next roundtable is on January 11th. And for all of you that have subscribed to the Thrive in China roundtable, you will continue to be part of the community. And you will get the full listing of what we have planned next year. If there are topics that you are interested in listening to or need content on or for your own businesses, then let me know. I'm open to that. We've got the agenda set up for next year in terms of topics and themes, but anything else that you would like to hear about, do let me know. I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and I look forward to seeing you on January 11th. Take care and goodbye.